All right.
Okay, so there you go. Yeah. So hello, it's Gustav Andersson. I'm standing here with Mariama Williams.
Mariama.
Mariama Williams. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna have some short questions for you. We're just at the Fair World Network session, and we talked about the Paris Agreement. So, what was the reason for your attendance at this summit?
Okay. So I work with an intergovernmental organization called the South Center, which was established by developing countries. Currently we have 55 members, I think, of developing countries, and we were established to support them in their negotiations because there was a South Commission that was set up under the auspices of former President Nyerere of Tanzania, and he was part of what was called the South Commission, and they were looking at the state of the South. And one of the, apart from doing all the economic analysis, one of the things that they came up with was that the developing countries did not have an independent source of information in their negotiations. The information they were using in negotiation, they were getting from the parties across the table. So one of the recommendations from the South Commission report was that the developing countries needed an independent research institution that would provide them with analytical, policy-relevant research around the topics that they were engaged in negotiations. So the South Center was established, was created by treaty and approved by the General Assembly to provide that service. So we're based in Geneva. So our job is to partake and help developing countries by providing them analysis. Sometimes we bring them together before meetings like this so they can talk. That's the first time they'll see each other, and they can kind of resolve issues, or not resolve issues, but at least understand where each other is coming from on different topics of negotiation. So we work on trade, we're primarily on economic and environmental issues. We don't do a lot on human rights or peace and security, but on finance, debt, and so forth. And climate change is one of the issues that developing countries have said since about 2006 that they needed us to be here. So we've been coming every year, trying to understand the issues, trying to present briefing papers to developing countries, research papers, trying to have workshops with them, and trying to bring them together so they could discuss and share on ideas before they come into the site.
Thank you. Well, one of the issues that were raised during this session is about finance, and especially North-South finance.
Right.
And it was talking about, well, one estimated cost for developing countries for achieving this like percentage goal is 4 trillion.
Yeah. Okay, so first you have to remember that in this context, under the UNFCCC, there is a thing called climate finance, which is quite distinct from development finance. Because development finance is what developed countries give to developing countries out of solidarity, out of foreign policy consideration, and so forth. Climate finance is a legally binding obligation under the convention, okay, in Article 4, because it was recognized in 1992 when they came together to deal with climate change, that a significant portion of the accumulation of greenhouse gas arose from the development pathways of Western Europe, US, Japan, Australia, and so forth. So that's why we have this discussion that they must take the lead in reducing the emission and so forth, and that furthermore, the developing countries, they must provide the developing countries with finance and technology to enable developing countries to carry out their obligations under the convention. So that's been a source of contention even after the ink was dry. And so the finance has been very slow in coming. So it's been coming, and the convention has set up a financing mechanism that is the entity to which this money should flow. And the Conference of the Parties had a memorandum of understanding with the Global Environment Facility, which is an existing organization set up by the World Bank to finance environment. And they contracted the Global Environmental Facility to be in service to this convention. So the money that would come from Annex 2 countries, so there's Annex 1 and Annex 2. So Annex 1 are the developed countries who have historical responsibility for climate change. And within that are Annex 2, which are the OECD countries, right? So that the former Soviet countries would not be providing finance, but the OECD countries would provide finance. They're Annex 2. And so they've been supposed to send this money through to the convention mechanism. And the report says it's been coming at about 10 billion per year. Then in 2007, when they met in Bali, and again there was a big tension, and they said, okay, we will accelerate our financing if developing countries agree to take mitigation action. Because under the convention, developing countries don't have an obligation to mitigation action. So that was the bargain. You might hear about the Bali bargain. And so then 2 years later, they said, we will provide $30 billion in fast-start financing. So why is it fast-start? Because they hadn't been doing what they were supposed to do since 1992. So the $30 billion in fast-start financing was from 2010 to 2012. And then in addition to that, they said, we will promise to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020. So it actually been from 2010 to 2020. Okay, so comes Paris. So that money, as they did accomplish the 30 billion, right? The developed countries did provide $30 billion from 2010, 2011 to 2012. So that means about 10 billion a year has been more or less going to developing countries through the convention mechanism. There's money that's going outside because they've also developed their own funds, right? So some of it goes here, some of it goes there because they want to control it. And it comes through the convention, they don't control it as much. It's all the bilateral money. So there's a whole bunch of things around this. Anyway, the Paris Agreement comes, and the Paris Agreement was initially, it's supposed to cover finance, technology, adaptation, and mitigation. However, in the agreement itself, there is nothing about the financial commitment. But in the decision, what came out of Paris was the Paris Agreement and a decision, a set of decisions, right? But in the agreement itself, there's nothing that they just say we agree to reaffirm our commitment to finance, blah, 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 but no quantitative amount. But in the decision that will be implementing the agreement on paragraph 53, they say we recommit to provide the $100 billion per year, and we extend it to 2025. So it was supposed to be done by 2020, now it's extended to 2025. And then they further said, after 2025, we should all get together now, everybody, not just us, developed countries, but everybody, all the countries will get together. And we'll use the floor of $100 billion as a way to project money forward after 2025. So that's the money that's on the table. Well, the promise of the money that's on the table. And the money is supposed to come through the Green Climate Fund. Part of it, significant proportion of it. So what has gone to the Green Climate Fund has been $10 billion. That's been pledged by the developed countries, of which they have actually cashed. The Secretary can actually work with about $6 billion as of now, right? So the U.S. in March actually allowed for 300. It promised $2 billion, so 300 million is available. So what's happening now is that you have this supply of money that's promised, right? It's to be mobilized. So it's not on the table, it's not sitting anywhere except the 10 billion in the Green Climate Fund. It's all that we have sitting there. The other 90 billion, we don't know. Because Paris didn't say how to do it. But at the same time, you have these INDCs, intended national determined contributions, which are the plans that all the countries have said, this is how we're going to contribute to the global effort to deal with climate change, including keeping the 2-degree guardrail, and then with a goal, an aspirational goal of maybe bringing it to 1.5. So these plans are the plans that are supposed to get us to 1.5, right? And in all of the plans from developing countries, all of the developing countries says, we can do X, Y, and Z on our own, but if we're going to do more, we need financing. And so what a couple of NGOs and research scientists have been doing since Paris is to analyze those INDCs and see what are the costing of them. Some countries provide explicit costs, this is what it will cost us, some didn't, so you have to go back and try to figure it out. And the sum that came out as of this year is that the sum of all these INDCs is $4 trillion. That's to implement them. So $4 trillion and $100 billion. It's a very vast difference. But we don't even have the $100 billion.
Okay, right, so Canada is somewhat of a non-system.
So that's part of the struggle that's been ongoing. And that's why people are saying, okay, we have the spirit of Paris, we all agreed and everything. Well, let's see how we're going to implement it. Because if the bridge to 2 degrees is these INDCs, and they have to be implemented. And if even 60% of them are saying, we will do this, but we need financing, and you only have 10 billion, and say one country alone can absorb that 10 billion, what do you do? So then the question is, how do you ratchet it up, right? And that's been an ongoing debate before Paris, under Paris, and there have been many studies about how you could get the 100 billion. Forget, nobody's talking about 4 trillion yet because that's new numbers, but the 100 billion has been a source of much research. So the UN appointed a task force to look at how you could get the $100 billion. And they came up with various things. 60% of that should come from public finance from the developed countries. And then maybe another 20% could come from fossil fuel, emitting fossil fuel. And then another 10% could come from aviation, bunker taxes, and some people think that you could get it from carbon taxes. So there are lots of mechanisms that are floating around. Some people argue that the IMF could float. You're familiar with the IMF, right? That the IMF could float SDRs for climate. So that's also another way to. So there's lots of, you could set green bonds. So there are many mechanisms of how to do it. The question is the political will to implement any of those mechanisms.
Well, thank you for such a comprehensive answer.
Okay.